Listen, I'm really pleased. I'm Christine Davies, the Vice President for Global Partnerships at Asia Society, and I'm really pleased to be here to introduce one of the most active and involved global trustees at Asia Society. Frank Brown is a real stakeholder in our mission to build bridges of understanding between the East and the West. And professionally, Frank is the Managing Director and Chief Operating Officer at General Atlantic, which many of you may know is a leading global growth investment firm. This means that Frank has a huge focus on GA's global operations, which includes an established and a growing presence in Asia. Frank may be better known to many of you as the former dean of the INSEAD Business School, which has campuses in Europe, Asia, and the Middle East. It's truly a global enterprise. And he's also a leader who gets credit for having increased the participation of women in INSEAD's MBA program by 50%. So talk the talk and walk the walk. So I have to say it's a global leadership role, and I think a pedigree that gives Frank just a little bit of credibility and context for leading us, moderating us in this session with Tracey and Shariq today. Frank's also, I have to say, the author of a book on transcultural leadership called The Global Business Leader, which promotes key activities like networking, building effective teams, how to succeed with crisis management, pursuit of work-life balance, and I suspect some of the framework that Frank has crafted for leadership success and effectively navigating the C-suite will come up today. So we're so appreciative that Frank could take the time to be with us, as well as and he's going to introduce our panelists. So ladies and gentlemen, I give you Frank Brown.
Thank you, Christine, for that way too kind introduction. My book was published 8 years ago, and so if any of you want to be truly unique, buy one this year. It's a pleasure to be here, and I think it's great that we have a relatively intimate setting, and we're going to try and make this very interactive. I'm delighted. I've got two great colleagues to join me up here on these stools. First is Tracey Doi, CFO of Toyota Motor. Tracey, welcome. Thank you. And I'm not going to go into great detail on because I know you all have the bios, and I think we'd rather get down to but one who has steadily moved up, as has Shariq, moved up the chain and can really talk about what it takes to get into the C-suite. So Tracey, welcome and thank you.
Thank you, Frank.
And Shariq Yosufzai, who is Chevron. We had a long title in the first panel. So Vice President, Global Diversity, Ombuds and University Partnerships for Chevron Corporation. Shariq, welcome. Thank you. What we'll try to do is leave plenty of time for questions, but I'd also say the reason we're using these microphones, by the way, is because they're trying to record this session. It is a small enough room that we would be able to do it without, but what I'd like to do is, have a dialogue among the three of us for about half hour, 40 minutes, and that will leave plenty of time. We've got an hour and 15 minutes. That will leave plenty of time for interaction with all of you. But what I'd also say is if something comes to mind while we're talking, raise your hand and I'll recognize you as soon as I can and let you have input. Make sense? So in the last session, and while I'm asking this rather long question, you guys can hopefully formulate an answer because I didn't tee you up on this. But in the last session, a lot about mentoring, sponsorship, a lot about organizations within organizations that help to identify and develop talent. And I think that was all good. But what I want to know is, for you two who have been successful in getting there, what's the one thing you would point to that made the difference at Toyota, that made the difference at Chevron, and you feel was really key to your success, and how did it come about?
Well, for me, I think it was trying to debunk a stereotype of Asians, which is that we do not seek out areas outside our comfort zone. So I'm a trained chemical engineer, but I had a passion for marketing. And my first pivot point, to use the phraseology in the session, was when I was successful in moving into marketing, and I was complaining because, an engineer is always an engineer, so I always believe in data-based decisions. Without data, you really are not very well informed in making decisions. And I wanted to create this revolutionary network, this is a long time ago, of providing real-time margin and volume data to our salespeople in the field. And we had an IT group there that was charged with making this infrastructure, E-system at the time it was called, come to fruition, but it was not working. It was behind schedule and way over budget. And I started complaining and complaining and complaining, so finally they said, well, you know so much, you're now the CIO. I did not know much about information technology, but I surrounded myself with people that did, and worked more really because the hard skills that had got me there, which is being a subject matter expert in process engineering, were totally useless in information technology. But how we got things done by creating a vision, by developing a plan, by taking people where they wouldn't go themselves, was a pivot point for me. And so stepping out of my comfort zone was the one characteristic that I would suggest transformed me from a subject matter expert, technically competent, all the things that you hear about Asians, into a leader that was able to articulate an inspirational and aspirational picture of the desired future state, which moved people to action. So that was my aha moment.
That is a great one. I just want to reinforce something you said a little more subtly, and that is about surrounding yourself with people that know or might know more than you do, and not being afraid to do that is a key to success. Thank you. Tracey.
I think it's hard to point to one pivotal moment.
But you're going to.
I would say I would agree with Shariq's comment about building a strong team, surrounding yourself with talent. I'd also reflect that being self-aware and being open to feedback in all facets of my life, because I think as I've progressed through my career, I've also raised a family. We have 2 children that are now, one's in college, one's getting ready to go on that journey. So I hadn't heard that term of personal board of directors at that point in time, but would say having folks that I really trust and am receptive to feedback. It could be coaching on technical skills. So that could be a partner at Pricewaterhouse or KPMG or Deloitte, who we all use all of those. It could be close girlfriends that are also in senior positions that know what it's like to be struggling with the work-life balance. It could be a mom at school that I co-room parent with and that want to understand what it's like to go the next step with your children. So I would say it's really important to have people that are strong sounding boards in all facets of my life, and those people change as life goes on.
I just want to, again, reinforce the network isn't just the business cards that you collect. It's the neighbors, it's the friends, it's the family, it's the others that you engage with. I think there's a great point, well made. One follow-up, and again, this one isn't rehearsed, isn't on the sheet, and the answer may be no, but I think it's always interesting to find out, because a journey to a leadership role is always going to be a bit of a jagged line. And so just the question, and I'm going to share one after, but just the question, where'd you fall down and how'd you get up along the way? Any war stories that are worth sharing?
Sure. So I started in public accounting. I was with Arthur Andersen. Really got great training, and then left to go to a healthcare company. was an acquisition. I thought it would really grow, led by individuals that were probably great medical professionals, but not great business people. So then I leaped to an entertainment company and realized that there was a difference in ethics. So that was really a quandary because certainly after having a rather short tenure at the first company, I thought, oh, I can't leave again. And my dad had been, earlier in this morning session, there was a lot of discussion about parents and parents' influence, right? My dad had 30 years with ARCO. So for a company man to see his daughter move from company to company, that was hard. But I needed to be true to myself and quickly found something else that was a better fit. So I would say sometimes knowing yourself and knowing your true, what makes you tick and staying true to your ethics is really important.
Great. Shariq.
Yeah, my first job as a leader of a P&L was leading a company called Texaco Lubricants Company, which was a precursor to one of the companies that Chevron acquired. And when I first got there, very similar to the lady from Colgate-Palmolive, I found that there was really no strategy, there was no vision, it was all about execution. Because the business was not doing very well. It was just a collection of activities. It was really not a business. And I started out by trying to articulate a value proposition that many of our products, and those of you that are not familiar with the lubricants business, this is divided into commercial and industrial lubricants, which are used by industry and fleets, and automotive lubricants. So this is the fast-moving consumer goods business. Toyota is a customer of Chevron Lubricants.
Thank you.
And thank you. And so, I, at the time, said we need to focus on strategy. But what happened is that we invested so much in R&D that we were not moving the P&L rock. It basically went from a loss-making business to a break-even business when we needed to go into a profit-making business very, very soon because the company had ability to invest its capital in other parts of the business. And the lesson there that I learned, and we fixed it very quickly, was that execution without strategy is mindless, but strategy without execution is a pipe dream. So that is the that is the lesson that I learned, and that is the key that has been. You have to have a balance. It's not all about strategy, and it's not all about execution. You have to execute to a plan. But that was the lesson that I learned because I remember very clearly my boss calling me after a session with our board, and they said, "Oh, that was a very interesting presentation you made, and but remember, without a short term, there won't be a long term." So understanding that blend was very, very important, and it's a lesson learned.
Great. I'll share mine. One of the I started out in public accounting as well, Pricewaterhouse, and then PwC, and spent 26 years there. And at the tail end of those 26 years, I ran for CEO twice, was rejected twice. Happens, right? And I sort of thought to myself, well, okay, there's, what else am I going to do here? And it caused me to be open to the next thing, which I never would have imagined that somebody would, an academic institution would want a relatively dumb guy like me to lead it, having no academic experience whatsoever. But it goes back to Shariq's first point about being up for something new, getting out of your comfort zone. And, so in my case, when one door closed, another one, which was super interesting, and in addition made me more than a boring accountant so that, other organizations might be interested in me down the road. So
I don't think we're boring.
Yeah, we're boring. At least in our initial iteration, we're boring. If we hadn't done cool stuff after the fact, we'd still be boring.
Right.
I apologize. And anybody in the Big Four in the room? I've just trashed. Sorry, ladies.
Great foundation.
You can have a comeback and beat us up later. That's true. That's true. Good. Mentors and the concept of mentorship and sponsorship, I think, is really critical, and it was brought out well in the other session. But I just want to go into it a little deeper. Can either of you talk about how you were mentored, but more importantly, how you were sponsored, and how you do that today, or encourage that to be done in your organizations?
So I've been fortunate that when I joined the company, I came previously from AT&T Wireless. So automotive was new to me, and I certainly needed guidance, not from a accounting perspective, but more about just the industry itself. So Dave Ellingworth, who was really a wonderful founder of the Lexus brand and someone who was my direct boss, gave me that guidance. Barbara Cooper, who was our CAO at the time, helped me with navigation, being a woman in automotive, and specifically within Toyota. Not so easy. And also being a global company, and I am of Japanese descent, but I'm fourth generation, and I'm not bilingual. Navigation in Japan also was a new attribute for me. And I remember my first treasurer, Japanese boss, I said, "Good luck, Tracey. I want you to enjoy your first visit to Japan and to meet our colleagues there. But just remember, the problem will be your face." And he hung up. And I thought, what's he talking about? But when I got there, I understood. Everybody saw me and would think that I would be bilingual, that I would fully understand the culture. And I misstepped. There were times that I did really the wrong etiquette. But I think it's just being open to learning. That mentorship, I think, was helpful, and having people who cared and wanted to see me succeed. How I mentor today, I think, is twofold. One, I'm really an active advocate for our business partnering groups. We have a wonderful array. I'm most involved with our women's group, TORC, and also our API group, TASIA. So I'll give you a couple examples. For TASIA, the group is 400 volunteers strong. Two community groups, or two community activities that they do are supporting high-performing scholars, API scholars that are pursuing STEM majors. And so the group does fundraises, supports scholarships, does a reception for their families, and hosts mentoring panels for them at that event. The other is providing support to charities in a broad array of communities. Could be Korean, Filipino, Cambodian, Japanese, Chinese, through 10 giving circles. And these are 5 or more team members with their families and friends that fundraise and give of their time and their money in the community. And through these networks, it's mentoring, because it's leadership and practicing leadership skills in a really safe environment. And then the executive team can be involved and provide hands-on training. And I'll say that I really have tried to watch out for those that volunteer through our business partnering groups to look for opportunities for them to be promoted within my own team. So I'd say it's kind of full circle. You can give back in the community. You can help our business grow and help Toyota's brand be out there, but also develop leadership skills out there.
Great. I would say that your mentor who talked to you about going to Japan, probably he may have been a mentor but wasn't a great sponsor, because a sponsor would have said, and oh, by the way, the reason I said that is because, so don't be shocked and you know, buckle up. And
we had more conversations.
Got it. Okay, good. Shariq.
Yeah, let me just introduce Gina Lee. Stand up, Gina. Gina is the president of our Asian Employee Network and is really a tremendous mentor in her own right, and her organization also mentors a lot of people. We have 700 pairs of mentor-mentee relationships, peer-to-peer mentees. And we deal with things that are very surprising. So I'll give you an example. We had a colleague from Cambodia and a colleague from Vietnam come over to our San Ramon, California headquarters in Northern California. And these are folks that have to dodge landmines to get to work. And the first thing they saw was somebody playing volleyball at lunchtime. And it was just a huge cultural shock about work-life flex or work-life balance. And likewise, there was a huge cultural shock from people that said, you have to dodge a landmine to get to work. And so people had experienced that before. And, the two colleagues that came over from Cambodia and Vietnam were paired up with mentees that had gone through the same experience. So that's one type of mentorship. All of our employee networks, we have 12 of them, have peer-to-peer mentorship. Sponsorship is a little different. Sponsorship, as Mahindra mentioned earlier, is something you earn. And the other day I was talking to our CEO, and he said, this is not Darwinian selection by any means, but I have limited time. I'm only going to sponsor people that have earned it. Earned it through performance, earned it through stepping out of their comfort zone, earned it through showing a lot of potential and a lot of promise and a lot of activity in our leadership forums. So sponsorship is something that you earn. Mentorship is something that you can demand. And most organizations provide it. The other part of mentorship that we have is upward mentorship. So mentorship is not just, a senior person or a peer, but it could also be someone from our XYZ network, which is basically a group that comes together to mentor some of our senior level and senior in age executives on social media. So I have a 21-year-old mentor who tells me about social media and how important tweets are and so on and how to use them. So, it's multifaceted and it's quite effective in helping us obtain not only personal goals, but organizational goals.
That's a great point. Do you do 360 feedback?
We do.
In Chevron and Toyota as well?
Probably we could do more of that. I would give you a couple examples of things that you might want to think about or casual mentoring that we found have opened up dialogue. One is a mentoring walk. So it's called Net Walk, and we invite all of our business partnering groups to the event, and we pair an executive with a few team members and take a casual walk around campus and then follow it with a reception. And what we find is that instead of sitting down in a conference room, and it's a little intimidating in an office, when you break it down and you're just having a conversation, maybe things flow and it's two ways, because I definitely have gotten the feedback from the executives. They get more out of it than they feel like they've given. The other is Toyota has had, I want to say, might be 6 years now, a North American Women's Conference. So we pull together leaders from across our supply chain, sales, manufacturing, finance, engineering. And so we've got the executive sponsorship and both male and female. Because I think from a sponsorship perspective, it's important that sponsors are coming from the majority because you want to make sure that your voice is heard. So that's another way that we've been able to pull people together. It's probably a forum similar to this type of event, and I think that it's been very effective.
One other I would mention is debunking the myths. Every organization has myths, and that is, maybe it's that Asians can't succeed to leadership positions in this organization. Or at INSEAD, it was women don't go to INSEAD because they don't have, it's a testosterone-laden, crazy place, and nobody's there. And we thought about it as a challenge. And we said, well, of course women go to INSEAD. At the time I joined, it was 17%. And there were a lot of good stories of women that had been there many, many years before in the alumni network. So what we decided to do, and sometimes you have to be discriminatory in order to succeed, but what we decided to do was to have women-only panels with alums, women who had been through the program and were able to talk about it, speaking only to a pool of prospective female applicants to the program, and telling the story and saying, I got through it, here's how I'm successful. I wasn't intimidated at all, nothing bad happened to me. And it just, but one of the funniest experiences of my life was here in New York, because we were also trying to increase the number of Americans in the program. So I moderated a panel of 5 very successful, very high-powered women in a room filled with 200 potential female applicants. I was the only guy. I don't even think the waiters were male, but it was more intimidating for me than it was for anybody else. But it worked is the point. So great. Can I just ask of those in the room, and I don't want to single anybody out, but if anybody wants to volunteer, in terms of mentoring experience, in terms of your organization, how they do it, what you'd like to learn more about this, because I think this is really, really important, and particularly the sponsorship point, which Shariq is 100% right. Top talent is going to get identified, and if the CEO is worth their salt, is going to get sponsored and really pushed forward. And the question ought to be, how do I get there, and who can help me? But any questions or any thoughts anyone wants to share? Please.
So GE, some of the things we've been trying also is around having more formal sponsorship programs. As we're GE very metric centric, we've been talking about how do you really measure the success of a program. So what are your thoughts? What are some of the things you've tried? How hard do you make the metric versus, you get a feel? How do you balance that?
Great. Anybody want to start?
So maybe I can tell you a little bit about our architecture, about how we manage our human resources and human capital. We in Chevron have an architecture of operating companies and strategic business units. So that's the hierarchy: the corporation, operating companies, and SBUs. We're sort of a federation, very decentralized, with loose, tight properties. Things like the Chevron way, very tight, no option to opt out. But different businesses and have different strategies. But one of the things that we insist on is something called the Professional Development Committee. And these go on to subdivisions of business units, strategic business units, and goes all the way up to what's called the HRC, which is a Human Resources Committee, which is basically the CEO and his direct reports. And we have a sort of a corporate cotillion, if you might want to call it. When you've been identified as a superstar or a high potential, it's called the CHAMP, or Chevron Advanced Management Program, sort of like Grotonville, that I don't know if GE still has that people come and actually work on projects and get identified as people with high potential that then deserve sponsorship. So that's very, very systematic. And each member of the HRC is then responsible for 5 or 6 people whose career they manage together with the individual. When I was president of global marketing, which was a $44 billion division of Chevron with operations in 80 countries, I had regional vice presidents. And one of the things that I noted is in our professional development committees, people of color and women would be on long lists for selections, and then they would be on short lists. But by the time the selected candidate was chosen, that number had dwindled to almost 0. And so we said, let's create a database. And let's say there were 65 people of color and women and non-U.S. nationals, UK nationals, and Canadian nationals that for one reason or another were not selected for the job. And you couldn't say something like, so-and-so is more qualified for the job. You had to say, well, Shariq does not have international P&L experience. So we then assigned that task to one member of my leadership team to fill that gap. And so the next time they came up, you couldn't say didn't select this person because they didn't have international P&L experience. And we actually tracked that, and within 5 years, we went from a leadership team that was maybe 10% non-Western expats and people of color and women to 77%. So if you have metrics, you treasure what you measure. I'm sure GE is very similar to that. And you have to measure it, hold people accountable. And basically, it was a metric. One unique thing about Chevron is that everyone from our CEO down to the action level colleague has a diversity action plan with SMART objectives, which they're monitored on. And your bonus is dependent on something called the individual performance factor. And one of the things that goes into we call our performance management system a PMP. And so there are 2 reviews. You establish your objectives. And in my case, I promised the CEO that in 3 years, I would move from basically a non-diverse leadership team to a diverse leadership team. And I was measured according to a glide path, and my bonus was affected by whether or not I achieved those goals. And it wasn't all of us, just me, but it was all of us. In fact, at Chevron, we have a group of 65 senior executives we call the Management Committee. And the Management Committee's bonus was affected by 10% if collectively we did not reach our objective of diversity in the senior ranks above over a 3-year period. So if one of us failed, all of us failed. So you can just imagine the peer pressure. So we never deviated from the glide path, and we never had the 10% penalty. But people absolutely deliver to what they're measured against. So that's how we do it.
I love the point about the objection, because there's a million of them. Don't have P&L experience, never lived abroad, never did this, never did that. So my stock answer to that objection is, and you can fill in the blank with whatever name you want, Jack Ma didn't have that when he started Alibaba either. Bill Gates didn't. Whoever you want to say.
Somebody was going to.
No, I was just going to say, in fact, that was a great point. I think for GE, the learning for us is it's not an annual plan. It's a glide path over 5 years that you've got to measure yourselves to. I think that's something that we can take back and think through. Because you can't really measure it within a year. You can probably assign something, just like you said, a global assignment. But I think we should start looking at it over a 5-year period. That's a great learning for us.
Toyota also has bifunctional division heads having their personal D&I plan. And not only does it include talent development, but it is also things like supplier diversity and trying to move the needle there. And it is, the major tenets are the same. You just move it through and you're trying to get from. So clearly an area of focus right now as we are integrating our sales and marketing team and our manufacturing engineering group. We're based out of Los Angeles as well as Erlanger, Kentucky, and we're integrating our group and consolidating in a new headquarters in Plano, Texas. So as I bring my new team together, this is definitely very much top of mind because my current team is 65% women and 40% people of color. And so as I move the group to Texas, I know that that's something where I may have attrition in one area or another, and I want to be sure that the new pipeline is full.
One other thing I would add, and you're always dealing with objections, you're dealing with inherent bias in any organization, that the more objective the metrics are, the better. So I'll give 2 examples. In the education business, you can't argue with the voice of the customer. So if the classroom says this, Asian female teacher is the best I've ever had, and her rankings in the classroom outstrip the crusty old German who's been there forever, that's who's going to succeed. And in the investment business, it's pretty easy. ROI. You can't argue with it. That's what drives success. And I think too often, we succumb to the objections that Shariq was pointing out. And if you've got really tight metrics that no one can argue with, it's a much better situation.
Our talent acquisition team actually is helping with the training of our hiring managers by having a short video of unintended biases, of just trying to ensure that there's just a bit of education before, because historically we've had such a low attrition rate of 3 to 4%. So it's new to be hiring such a large group of people and trying to think about that. And maybe considering what are the skills and the talents that we need to be successful in the future, just putting that top of mind.
The best one I heard recently was there are no female private equity professionals in India. Can you imagine?
Wow.
We found them. Sorry. Question?
My question is for Tracey. And my question is around leadership and influence. And you have gone against the grain of a very male-dominated C-level suite. You were one of very few women that I know of. And of course, the second is Asian, and even less. Could you give us some examples of how you have been able to lead and influence?
I think you have to know your own style and live it. So I mentioned Barbara Cooper as a mentor. So when I was promoted to CFO, I joined the company as the controller. She took me to lunch and she said, you need to have a little bit more gravitas. You need to be able to own the room a little bit more. And I said, okay, let me stand up for you. I am 5'4" on a good day, and she is 6'2", blonde. I'm going to have a different style. And when I look at who I was succeeding in the group that I was working with, clearly my approach was going to be different. So I would say be true to yourself and know that your style is, and not apologize for that. As far as a role, the finance role to me is about connecting the dots and making sure that you're solving people's problems and giving them the help that they need to be successful, because we all want to grow the business profitably. So I think it's being solution-oriented, and it's not always easy to say no. Jack Hollis leads our Toyota brand marketing. That guy can spend money faster than I could talk. Right? So it's coming together with a meeting of the minds is probably the way I would say. Another is described me of managing with a velvet glove. So saying no, and actually he said this to me, he's like, you're smiling and you're telling me no and I'm smiling back. What's wrong with that? So I guess I would just say is trying to build common grounds in a collaborative fashion. I recently broadened my role to include manufacturing and engineering. So I'm learning a new area. I've been collaborating with my counterpart for many years. And so as he moves into a new role, I'm bringing together two parts of the organization. So my approach is continue to learn, tap into people that know more than I do and are willing to share. So I guess that would be one. So I don't know if it's because of gender or because of my ethnic background. I am who I am. I don't know if I answered your question.
Other questions in the group? Any subject?
I'll just ask a quick one. This is Tracey. You mentioned about the mentoring walk.
Yes.
Well, I mean, this typically for Asians especially, it is very uncomfortable to be seen as if you're being mentored by somebody, right? I mean, I can tell you people who say that I don't want people to know that you're mentoring me, right? So when you're actually in a conference room, it gets to be a little more private and confidential. But you step outside, you're walking the floor, everybody can see that you're talking to this business leader, you're talking to the HR leader, and you're being mentored. Did you see that happening with your Asians, or even across, probably beyond Asians within the company? Did you have to get over that hurdle?
Maybe it was the form that we had. So I'll describe it for you a little bit better. 200 people signing up to be part of the mentoring walk that are already active in their ERG or business partnering group. So this would be, and the volunteers that organize it, the chief organizers in this case are our leaders in our women's network. And they reach out to the other business partnering groups and invite others. So they're saying, Betty, Joe, would you like to be part of this networking event? And what are you interested in? Oh, do you want to meet the head of sales? And are you thinking about a job in this area? We could just have a casual conversation. You could learn more about that area. So I guess, yes, there'd be intimidation of being with an executive, but the thought is safety in numbers. So if there's 3 of you walking, then maybe you're not feeling so alone. I did see that once when someone had asked me to have lunch, and there were 2 of them who asked me at the same time. And normally it's usually just one person, right? So maybe, I guess I didn't really think about it that way. I would comment this, though. To me, mentoring isn't as much of, I never went to someone and said, Hank Bondi, will you be my mentor? I did it more of just on a daily interactive basis, that as on a skip level basis, he was the head at AT&T, and he was 2 levels above me, and we just threw a project. So that's probably what I've adapted more. Chris Yang is a rising star within our legal department. Very talented individual, bilingual, someone that I see could be our future general counsel. We worked together on a project where we were handling an environmental concern in one of our plants. And so we got to know each other a little bit better. And then when he got approached for a new job, calls me and said, I'm looking at this, what do you think? That to me is honestly a more effective mentoring than being assigned a mentor. And that's what I enjoy more, is that than being, we did a mentoring scout program where you signed up and you got assigned. I didn't enjoy that as much.
Yeah, I might just add that I think it may be generational, this reluctance to be known that you're being mentored. Our millennials, especially in our XYZ network, have no qualms about sending a note to the CEO saying, would you mentor me? In fact, our demand pull is so high that one of the things we did was a sort of a hackathon where we had speed mentoring, where we had 50 executives in the room and 500 colleagues, most of whom were recent graduates, and they loved it. They came with one specific area they wanted to work on, and then we basically did a hackathon-like speed mentoring. The millennials enjoyed it more than the executives because they wanted to say something else. So I think it may be generational also.
Yeah, I think there's another point here, and that is if it's rare that an executive, a senior executive, spends one-on-one time with someone in the organization, that's when it looks weird. That's also when that executive has a problem. Because if you want to be effective as an executive, you've got to be engaged. You've got to have an open door, and you've got to be willing to work with people. And if it's so unusual that Tracey and that executive or Tracey and that mentee would be walking around, then that's probably a different problem in my experience. Yes, please.
Hi. I have a question. If you really look at the executive leadership, the percentage of agent, right? So we all know that has been quite low. So what do you see the leadership skill gap there? So do you have any perspective?
Yeah, I do. So let me kind of just share the data to build upon what you just said. Asian population of the U.S., about 4.5% to 5%. The number of Asian graduates of Ivy League institutions, about 18%. The number of engineers at the UC system that are Asians, North Asians or South Asians, 70%. The lowest conversion rate of any race from associate to partner is Asians. If you look at the tech industry, and we looked at it, we saw that of the 100 companies that were recently IPO'd, 26 were headed up by Asians. And the Asian population of Northern California is 14%. You think something really great is happening there. And 50% of these companies, which recruit primarily from the UC system, are Asian of the total employee base. But then you subtract the number of people that started their own companies, the number of CEOs that came out just through the merit program and didn't start their own companies is 6. So 26 dropped to 6. The lowest conversion rate of any race in tech from subject matter expert or manager to C-suite, CMO, CIO, CTO, CPO, whatever you want, is Asian. And it is true of every industry, and particularly the tech industry, where the issue is not that the pipeline is not full. The pipeline is really full of Asians. So we have actually partnered at Chevron with a group called Ascend and the Stanford Business School, which happens to be 50% Asian faculty, to see why this is. And we have identified, and we can go into it offline, 3 systemic reasons, meaning organizations have these biases, both conscious and unconscious, against Asians. And regardless of whether you're North Asian or South Asian, there are 3 behavioral characteristics of Asians that are preventing them to going into the C-suite. Then, after we identified these 3 systemic reasons and 3 behavioral reasons, we assembled a group of about 60 high potential employees, 30 Asian Americans and 30 Asians. So no hyphens, Singaporeans, Filipinos, and said, this is what we have found. Do you agree? And to a person they did. And then we developed an action plan to try to address. We said, we'll take care of the systemic, you have to take care of the behavioral. And this is a 3-year project. Initial results are good, but we'll see about 2 years from now whether or not we made a difference.
I'm sure everyone else wants you to name the 3 systemic and the 3 behavioral.
I'll leave you hanging here.
So we ain't moving on until you do that, Shark.
All right. Well, the first, and this is a long treatise, so I'm telling you a 500-page summary and giving you the Reader's Digest version. The first reason Asians are not identified for the C-suite is the inverse impact of the Asian work ethic. The old joke that an Asian F is a B. Asians are taught, put your head down and work hard, and that'll get you ahead. It does get you ahead in college. But 85% of all decisions that are made to move people into the C-suite are based on soft skills. Can you articulate a vision? Do you have a strategy? Can you develop a plan? Do you inspire people? Can you select a team? Can you handle a crisis? And that is not something that happens if you just put your head down and just work hard. Number 2 is deference. Asians do not speak up in meetings. And, I told our Asian network, we have a 95% rejection rate of people that we bring into our company. So we only select 5%. The average GPA is 3.5. We have basically the top people. And so I know that you're very capable. But if you don't speak up in a meeting, I have 2 assumptions. One, that you're stupid, which I know you're not because you graduated at the top of your class or in the top quartile, or worse, that you're not interested. And how different is the Asian axiom, the loudest duck gets shot, versus the Western axiom, the squeakiest wheel gets the grease. So if you have to participate, you can't be baggage in a room. And the third is that Asians don't take risks. They don't go out of their comfort zone. And I can give you example after example of how this occurs. The 3 systemic reasons that we found, one was assumption that Asians are subject matter experts. They're brilliant scientists, brilliant mathematicians. They can solve problems, but they're very, very weak in getting action through others, meaning they're subject matter experts, they're not charismatic, they cannot move people, and consequently they don't make good leaders. The second is that Asians are very good on strategy, but very poor on execution. That's another systemic risk. And the third, and this is a matter of some controversy, is that Asians do not handle crises well. And they're subsets of it. I'm distilling, something that is very multifaceted. So those are the three behavioral reasons and the three systemic reasons that this study has identified. It's not public yet, but we are privy to it because we commissioned it and we're testing it to see if this is really true.
It's great. Thank you.
I'm actually surprised about the execution because if, from an Asian perspective of the individuals that maximize every opportunity and do the nth degree, I don't know that I would agree.
It's a perception, and like all perceptions, it's probably false.
I would layer on to that I think sometimes if the focus is technical skills and having the best outcome and get focused on the results, that maybe less emphasis has been placed on soft skills such as communication, both written and presentation, verbal, being able to get your message across in an effective way. Toyota had sponsored a public speaking class for me that they had a CNN anchor teach the class, and it was really helpful. So I look at Betty, who's a great communicator. They taped me, which I hate, right? No one likes to have their videotape on that. An accountant or a finance or a legal person tends to layer on facts, wanting to present evidence. And the CNN anchor said, get your message across the first 30 seconds, then present your evidence, then say your message again. So that resonated with me. That was helpful. The other was negotiation skills. So back to Fabian's question earlier about being effective in the role, negotiation's hard. And I thought of negotiation as a legal contract or a procurement contract. Every meeting that you go into is a negotiation because typically when you go into a meeting, you're trying to have an outcome. And so that kind of flipped my thinking a little bit of thinking of who the audience is and what are you trying to get out of it? What are you trying to deliver? And the last point I'd give is that besides delivering outcomes, relationships are really important. And maybe in the workplace, it could be gender or it could be also ethnic diversity. There are a lot of common circles that happen. So I'll just say within Toyota, average tenure is 20 years plus. So our senior executive team have grown up together. I actually came in from the outside. I was hired at a VP level. So when you look at, I'm going to put this down for a second. When you look at circles of influence and you think of the overlap between personal and professional, think about how your circles overlap. Is it like this, personal and professional of overlap? Or is it more like this, that they're stronger? So if you're trying to do a compelling argument or have a really difficult conversation and you don't know the other individual that you're having that conversation with, think about how you can find a common base, common foundation. Mine isn't going to be on the golf course. I actually could play golf, but I'm not going to be out there all the time. But maybe my common ground with the head of sales or the head of distribution is about the fact that both of us have kids that are getting ready for college. So think about the personal connection, not just the professional one. Because I think what I've seen, I think of someone right now who's super smart in our treasury function. She's all about the numbers. And I've got to help grow and develop her to connect on an individual level.
Tracy, if I could react to that, because I think you touched on something that I certainly can relate with. When we look at a typical organization, which is the triangle, at the bottom of the rungs, lots of diversity, and the criteria for promotion tends to be competence, technical mastery, etc., things that Shariq can talk about. But at the higher levels of the organization, it changes.
Yes.
Relationships. And relationships tend to be formed, trusting relationships tend to be formed among people who have similar interests. And when I self-examine, the people that I want to build a personal relationship with, for me, maybe because I'm Asian or whatever, I want to build a relationship with people that I would feel so comfortable inviting into my home for dinner. It's very personal, it's very long-lasting, it is for the long run. And my impression of the mainstream American is that I can still have a great trusting relationship with you and not necessarily even like you, for that matter. And I think my attitude about what a relationship is limits my possibilities.
So it depends what you're trying to strive for. How many of you have had a project that you really were passionate about, an initiative that you wanted to see go through, and you got rejected? Have you ever had that happen? Happens all the time, right? So what I started to do a little bit more, because, okay, I'll give you a few, trying to get an ERP approved, a massive investment that I really strongly feel we need to do. I think about the stakeholders, and I color code them, red, yellow, green, and then I think about what would make them green. And not everybody needs to be green. Some people can be yellow, and some people are yellow only because their boss is red. So that I don't need to make them a personal friend to get them to be green. I just need to show the value of what my proposition or my project is to get them to be green and why it matters to them or their division or their team. So I think there's a difference in relationships. I'm not going to invite everybody to my daughter's wedding, right? That isn't the goal. But sometimes it's getting them to be able to provide the resources, the subject matter experts that we need to have the project to be effective. Maybe it's to move their project that they are so passionate about to a lower priority and wait just a little bit longer.
Can I just add, I agree with the characterization of Americans. I think you would find a different story if you looked at Americans who had lived outside of the U.S. There was been a question way in the back, and then we're going to go here. Please.
It's more of a comment and just an observation as well. Yes, relationships important, no question. When we were starting a program at GE in the Asian Pacific American Forum, it's called the APAC Commercial Excellence. It was essentially trying to bring strong technology people into the commercial function, because if you can get that right, it's very powerful both for GE and for the individual's career. And the hypothesis was, and we feel it's true, that a lot of Asians actually are very good at relationship management, because we've all grown up, generally speaking, in larger settings of families. You're navigating through immense number of relationships, but you've just forgotten how to use that in your professional. You kind of just bifurcate that, And when we go back, like in my case, I grew up in India, but I've been here 22 years now. When you're in that setting, you are relationship managing all the time. You're networking. You will never get out of the house to get anything done without making a phone call first in your network. So all of that is there. It's just about how do you bridge that to your professional life as well. And so we've been having some success in getting people bridged over from strong, somebody who understands the gas turbine engine fantastically. You put that person in front of a customer, great, right? But just give them that skill set and remind them that it's inherent, it's deep down there somewhere. And you just need to kind of bring it back out. And it's one success at a time. The metrics are hard. But we do rejoice in those one successes at a time as well.
But I also think it's educating as well that everybody doesn't need to be the extrovert to be successful. And so that's probably something for the executives in the room to think about, coaching their own team to manage expectations for the person who's a little bit more reflective and then presents their argument.
Check. How many more questions do we have? Wait, no, you're not next. This one right here is next. Okay, good. We've got time. Please.
So mine's going to be a comment piggybacking off of, I think, what was started by you. So I often think that part of it is cultural, right? And that goes to your point about the Americans who have traveled abroad get a sense of that cultural. But it's part of, like, you know, I'll speak from my personal experiences. It's my upbringing, right? So my parents were very private. I've become very private. So to me, that intersection that you're talking about with the circles becomes harder at work, right? And I am looking for more of those meaningful relationships because I often find that whether it's the American colleagues or whoever the colleagues are, there's that competitiveness that's working in corporate America, right? So can I really trust that person to have that meaningful intersection occur to sort of build on that relationship to get to the next level? So, I mean, there's a lot of different parts that all come together to fit in the puzzle, but I think that cultural aspect in the upbringing also plays a role.
Great point. Okay. Yes.
Yes, I just want to build on Shariq's three behavioral elements. I do see, I don't know whether it's included in your number 2, but I do see there's another one that, based on my observation, is the leadership visibility. I don't know whether it's included in your differences in the second column, but I think there's another potential.
No, I think you're right. You know, one of the things that Gina has done is facilitate a roundtable discussion with our CEO. He meets with all of our networks. There are no handlers, no facilitators, just the network, a diagonal slice through the organization, and he just talks. And it's really a two-way discussion. But one of the things that we've had is people that are high potential, that have this wonderful moment to interact with the CEO in a group of 10 that don't say anything. And what a lost opportunity, because there was a two-way purpose, not only to get to know what was on our employees' minds, but to expose the employees to the CEO. So visibility is extremely important, both from the executives, but once you get the opportunity, if people don't speak up, it's a lost opportunity.
There's another weird phenomena in most issues of diversity, and that is that the successful people are reluctant to be seen as role models. The immediate assumption is if you put me up on the pedestal, everyone's going to think that the reason I got here is because I'm different. And that's something that you have to fight against. And I don't know if you guys have seen that, but it's something I've seen a ton of.
Yeah, in our Catalyst work, we observe an interesting phenomenon. When we went to some women leaders and said, would you be a role model? A surprising number of people said no, because I didn't get this job because I was a woman. That's what they thought. That number, thankfully, is dwindling, but that is something that surprised us, is people thinking, well, they think I got this for some reason other than merit. And that is something that we have observed also.
I'd say on the gender front that the women within Toyota really want to try to give back. And so that's why the North American Women's Conference has been so successful. And then we're trying to make it global. So we've invited representatives from Japan. And then within Japan, sadly, we don't have enough senior women. In fact, there are very few. So that is a mix between cultural, a deep cultural, that's what I'm learning, and not as if the company itself isn't offering opportunities. But what we've tried to do is have a little bit more of a global forum. So as we have women on assignment in Japan or traveling through for work, we've been trying to host small forums to be able to dialogue, because the role models might not necessarily be local, but they could be global.
Good point. Mahindra, you had a question?
Yeah, I mean, this question is for you, Shariq, but I think we've just heard a couple of those observations. So I'll say the fact and then kind of build on the comments you made earlier. In GE, what we've seen is across diversity forums, the number of hires that we have, number of people that are working that are less than 5 years experience is north of 50%. Especially as we go to the digital industrial business, we get a lot of software developers.
Sorry, it's not what?
0 to 50.
It's 0 to 50.
It's about 50% for people who are less than 5 years of experience in GP. So going back to the metrics of the study that you had in terms of perceptions of Asians in corporate world, do you see a segmentation between a Gen 1 immigrants versus people who've been one brought, like our kids who are one brought here? I call my son a coconut. He's brown on the outside, white on the inside. He doesn't necessarily understand the challenges that we went through. So do you see a difference in the way they conduct themselves, the millennials or the Gen Zs as we call them now, versus the first generation Asian Americans?
We haven't seen that yet in our research. The reason we brought 30 Asians and 30 Asian Americans together to see if there was any difference in the perception of Asians versus Asian Americans. And so that's still work that's happening. I suspect, similar to the question that you raised relative to the millennials versus others being visibly mentored, I suspect there would be a difference, but we haven't seen anything yet.
Great. Here
So,
first.
a comment that I have about that is when our CEO met with the Asian Employee Network and our leaders in Houston, the first thing he had asked us, so why aren't there a lot of Asian leaders? And so he wanted to get our thoughts, and a lot of our leadership is either millennials or they were not born in the US. And so after we gave them all this spiel about, I think it has a lot to do with generations, but deeply it's the cultural innate values that we have that holds us back. And they're pretty much underdeveloped leadership skills. It's not that Asians don't have them, it's just underdeveloped and we don't know about them. And so when he got our feedback, he was like, well, I guess we don't have a problem about you guys being leaders of the future company because we were very outspoken. And so I think the connection is that it's that deep cultural value that we still have. And so what our network does is that with our partnership with Ascend, we host this Myths of Asian Leadership workshop, and we kind of help educate them on what are the underdeveloped leadership skills. And then we go through these series of here are mentoring workshops to help you hone in on those skills to get you there. And then we send them to this executive insight series for the high potentials that want to get into that executive or the senior leadership level.
And just to build on that, as a result of this session that we had 2 years ago, we actually have for our high potential employees a leadership development program, which is an in-residence program directed specifically at those behavioral gaps and at the systemic gaps and how to overcome those biases at Stanford. And we host that annually. So we're trying to address the issue also.
There's another question here.
Yeah, I just had a quick, insight or comment, not really a question, but it touches upon, Shariq, your point when you listed the three sort of, factors or aspects of holding Asians back. And you mentioned the point about deference. Mm-hmm. That really resonated with me, and I'll tell you anecdotally a bit about me. I'm a lawyer. I work at a law firm. Law firms are traditionally very rigid, hierarchical, ossified structures, very stodgy and conservative. And so...
But they bill a lot.
But I'll tell you, I don't think that's changing, unfortunately, but I think as a lawyer, and definitely as someone who's sort of born and brought up in the United States, and obviously I'm of Asian descent, one of the things one of the sort of aspects that are drilled into young people's minds as they grow up in the system here in the U.S. is that you have to be hyper-politically correct. Now, I'm not trying to wade into a political discussion on political correctness, and obviously people have very sort of polarized views on that. But I think when you're in the U.S. and you're born and raised in this kind of atmosphere, and you're growing up and you're sort of going through college and you get your first job and you're part of the corporate hierarchy, you're one of the reasons why you're afraid to speak up is because you feel like I have to be politically correct. I can't offend somebody else's sensibilities, and I think that to a certain extent holds you back, as you rightfully pointed out. Now, I also wanted to touch upon one of your points, Frank, about how mentalities can be different outside of the United States. So I'm based outside of the United States, and I'll tell you, I'm one of the people that didn't really speak up originally in meetings and whatnot, and I try to justify it to myself to say, oh, it's good to be deferential. and I don't want to offend anybody, but when I go out to the Middle East now, I'll tell you, so here's the anecdotal part. In the Middle East, so in the US, my experience was, okay, fine, you're not ticking anybody off, keep quiet, that's good, you'll just move up quietly and slowly. But in the Middle East, if you're deferential, it's seen as a sign of weakness. So I've unlearned this trait of being quiet. And in the Middle East, I don't ask people, I tell people what to do. Right? And I know that sounds arrogant, and I do it. It's kind of an art, because you can't be cocky or arrogant or mean-spirited or antagonistic, because then no one wants to be your friend. But if what you're saying is correct, and you tell people what to do, the response was so bizarre to me. Suddenly everybody was more responsive. It was just a meaningful exchange. And I was like, whoa, why is this working here in this environment and not working in another environment? And so I think navigating your environs and being self-aware, and also being aware of where you're situated and what the mores are in that particular locale are very important. And my last point is, you need a mentor or sponsor that tells you, okay, it's okay to tell people to do things. Don't ask them to do things here. That's how things work here. Without somebody there to tell me that was how things work, I would have never figured that out. I would have never taken that first step.
So the moral to this story is that the quiet guy gets the last word. Congratulations. We are out of time, and I want to thank Shariq and Tracey for really phenomenal job and really insightful, great information. Shariq, I think everybody here should get this study when it's published, and also to thank all of you for being such an engaged group of participants. And you have a little sheet of paper in front of you to fill out before you go to coffee and give your thoughts on the session. But again, thank you all very much. Thanks, Shariq.